It was never promised the life here on earth would be easy, but let's go on this journey together. You're listening to From Hurt to Hope. So this episode of the From Hurt to Hope podcast is going to be a little bit different because I am actually recording on a weekend away at a women's Christian retreat. So I am not at home and there are people all walking around upstairs and there's people outside the door. But you know what? I had a message on my heart that I just wanted to bring to you guys today. And I really, really hope that you enjoy it. So it is currently September 2020 and leading up to this season of my life, there's been a lot of things. So I have a big milestone birthday coming up here in the next couple weeks, and I have done so much growth in this last decade of my life. And I just feel like I want to give you guys a little bit more of a glimpse at the things that I have experienced and also just some of the hurt and the trial that has really shaped me, not only in this past year, but in this past decade of my life. One of the biggest things that happened within this last decade of my life is that I became a mother. I thought I had a plan for how that was all going to unfold. And obviously things didn't go 100% according to my plan because I thought our first pregnancy, we would have one baby, and God blessed us with twins. So today I want to talk a little bit about the struggle and the pain and just some of the things that journey entailed and kind of where we are today and how I have been able to just like hold on to hope. How I have been able to watch two beautiful children that God has blessed me with just struggle and still be able to grow, but also just battle with that, like, I want to help them so much and I can't help them. So I have twins and they are just now turning 7 years old. And I think that is just amazing because I could not even dream of the day that they would even have a birthday, let alone be turning 7 and have celebrated 7 birthdays. But we got to recently do that. And I just think of it as such a blessing. And I am a crazy birthday enthusiast, you guys. Like, I make birthdays the biggest deal in the entire world. And there's a couple reasons why. Not because I grew up making my birthday a big deal. I don't think I made my day any different than like most kids would. But once I had kids, birthdays became the biggest deal ever. I do remember leading up to their first birthday, it was like an extravaganza. I have no idea how else to say it because it just meant so much to me. It was a huge celebration for their life because I didn't even know if they were going to be able to make it to their first birthday. So I have told my whole birth story in complete detail, and that is uploaded on YouTube. So if you are really curious into all of the details of my birth story, you can definitely check that out. But that is not the purpose of this podcast episode. So I was pregnant. And I was a high-risk pregnancy right from the get-go because I was a twin pregnancy, but I was also struggling with my weight at the same exact time. And I was working full-time and I was trying to listen to my body. I was having a hard time, staying nourished during the pregnancy. I was extremely sick during the pregnancy. I would get sick with morning sickness that happened to last all day long, 6 to 7 times a day. I could hardly keep any food down. I was probably dehydrated. My blood pressure was high. I think that had a lot to do with like the hormones and everything. I didn't have preeclampsia, but I was like pre-preeclamptic is what they would say. I wasn't losing protein, but I definitely had really high blood pressure. Struggled for the pregnancy. It was really hard on me. The babies were in great health. They always were. They always had, all the anatomy was great. They had really strong hearts. All of that was great. It was just my body and the stress that this twin pregnancy was putting on it. Like I mentioned, I worked full time during my pregnancy and I would go to work every single day. And at one point, my doctor was like, you need to be able to take a break. You need more than that 40-minute lunch break they're going to give you. You need to stay off your feet. And I really want you to just like take it easy, take a nap during the day. Well, I mentioned that to my boss, the branch manager at the bank I worked at, and I just felt like shame instantly. Like, I'm telling you, I need to take a break. My doctor's telling me that I need to take a nap. And this is just so crazy. So I didn't want to be any different. Nobody else that I had ever worked with had to make that request and things. So I didn't want to be any different than anyone else. So I just kind of pushed it off to the side and was like, nope, that is never happening. That is just, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to keep working at the capacity that I am. But I went into work on a Friday morning and I was really crampy. My back was hurting really bad. I was not feeling good at all. And I never had a baby before. I've never been pregnant before. I did not have twins before. So I had no idea what my body was doing and what it was trying to tell me. So I went in to my work and my back was hurting. I told a couple of my friends that were moms as well. I was like, my back is hurting really bad. And one of them happened to be my supervisor. And she's like, you could be having like back labor. That sounds like back labor. She's like, you need to call your doctor right away. And I'm like, are you sure? Like, I don't think so. So I didn't want to have to leave work and I just didn't think it was that bad. So I didn't call and it took maybe about an hour and I just still wasn't feeling good. And in the meantime, I was having like, it was almost like just like a cramp sensation and go away, like maybe lasting like 5 seconds, not lasting long at all. So I just said, you know what, this isn't a big deal. I'm not going to stress over this. And then it got worse and it got worse and it wasn't lightening up and it was getting like the cramps would come in a little bit more frequently. And so finally I called the doctor and the nurses just kind of pushed it off to the side, like, oh, this isn't much. You don't need to come in. You just need to go home and rest. So I decided at that time that I would have my mom come and pick me up from work because I didn't really want to drive. My husband was working out of town and she drove me across town to her house and I laid on the couch. And then once I like laid down and I started really like being able to like listen to what my body was saying, the cramping would come more frequently, but it would only still last 5 to 10 seconds and then it would release. I later found out that those were contractions happening. Knew my back was just hurting so bad. And I just told my mom, I'm like, we got to get to the doctors. I'm going to have to get seen. So I called back to the doctor's office and I said, I need to be seen now. And they're like, can you be here in the next like 30, 45 minutes? Because they're like, can you be here like 11:30, I think was the appointment time. Well, we didn't have much time and we were almost like 50 minutes away and we had to pack up and drop my nephew off because my mom was babysitting him and get in the car and drive. And I remember my mom was driving so fast to get me to the hospital. And I tell her every time, like I'd have the cramping contractions and, she got me to the hospital as soon as she could. I got to there, they checked me and I ended up being 4 centimeters dilated. My doctor looked right at me and said, you are being life flighted to Akron, which is the local hospital. Has a NICU, just kind of a bigger city hospital, a lot more care than what I would have been able to get at the small town hospital that I was at that day. So immediately Brad was notified. He came booking it off the job site, came right to the hospital, and it was like the scene in a movie where I was being wheeled out to the helicopter pad on the top of the hospital and Brad was running in to see me and say goodbye. And like our hands were like passing each other in the hallway and he gave me kisses. And next thing you know, I was life flighted. It was the first time I had ever been in any type of aircraft. And I was taken to a hospital in Akron, Ohio. Then things just got a little crazy. Like I said, I can't go into a ton of detail on that in this podcast because that's not what this episode is about. But things got crazy. I continued to progress in my labor and delivery. A little after 6 o'clock in the evening, they checked me and said that I was still dilating. I was still making progress, and it was going to be best to go ahead and have the babies right then. I had an emergency C-section. The doctors told me that the babies would be born within 5 minutes of telling me that I was going to have surgery, and 5 minutes later, they were born at 6:24 p.m. Both of our babies were born within the same minute. We had a baby girl, Oakland Christine, and then we gave birth to a baby boy, Barrett David. Birth in that operating room was one of the it's almost like a foggy memory, but then I also still remember some details so clearly and so vividly. It was tough. It was tough from the get-go. They were taken right away and taken to in a different room, and they were put on a ventilator to help them breathe. I didn't get to see them. Our baby boy didn't cry, and I couldn't hear it. And like they said they were crying, but you couldn't hear it. Like their faces were crying, like you could just tell they were trying to cry. But because they were born at 27 weeks, they could not breathe. They couldn't do that on their own. I remember telling Brad when our babies were delivered, they're like, Dad, do you want to see the babies? And I'm like, don't look at them. I was so scared. I didn't know. I mean, they ended up being 2 pounds. Oakland was 2 pounds, 2 ounces, and Barrett was 2 pounds. And I did not know what that was going to look like. And I was also so scared that Brad was going to look over there and see a baby that wasn't alive. And that was just heartbreaking to even think that. And it was just a very, very scary time. And I just remember him sitting back down on the stool after he got to see, I'm pretty sure it was Barrett that he really got a good look at. And after he sat back down on the stool, he just kept saying, he's so tiny. He's so tiny. So they whisked them off right away and they took him to the NICU. And that is a whole nother thing. I had no idea what a NICU really was until I heard about my babies were going to one. And this journey right here, our NICU journey, it was I don't know how else to describe it besides a roller coaster ride in the dark. It was the hardest journey. It was one of the hardest seasons of our lives. And I wish I could say that I clung to Jesus so much more during that time. I did, but I didn't because I didn't know really how to have a relationship. But I was definitely in constant prayer and praying over the babies and just trying to hold on to hope the entire time that they were there. It was a very tough process because Brad was only able to be at the NICU with me for the first week, and then he had to go back to work. And he definitely was able to stay closer to home. He tried to come up every chance that he got, but on the day to day, it was just me and the doctors and the nurses in the NICU. There were rounds every single morning at the NICU. So before noon, the doctors would be to each room. So I was staying at the Ronald McDonald House in Akron, and that is a near and dear charity to my heart for many reasons. But I was staying over at the Ronald McDonald House, and I knew every morning that I would wake up about 7:30, and I'd get to the NICU, and I would wait in the NICU, and I'd spend all the morning with the kids until the doctors came and did their rounds. So some days they would give us good reports, and some days they give us bad reports. Some days it was just, oh, we're just going to continue to let them do the same thing they did yesterday. The treatment plan is not changing. And then some days they were telling me, your babies are going to have surgery or your babies need to be put back on a ventilator. And it was just a really, really tough thing to navigate and then get that news on my own, but then also call Brad and try not to bring him down with the news because I knew he was working and he was doing his best to be in two places at once. It was tough. It was really isolating. It was hard to keep receiving tough news every day. Like I said, it was a roller coaster. Like some days were really great and then the next would be terrible. So I remember one night in particular, Brad had gotten to the hospital. He had gotten to the Ronald McDonald House. It was super late. So he went and spent some time with the babies, and then he came back and he was going to sleep in our room that we had. And it was like, I mean, he was exhausted. He maybe had had just a couple hours of sleep the night before. He was exhausted, worked all day, got to the hospital as he could. And Oakland was having a bad day that day. She was not doing well. She was really struggling to breathe. And she had just had a surgery on her heart, and she was having a hard time recovering from that. A lot of swelling in her airway, which was causing it harder. It was making it harder for them to be able to take the ventilator tube out. And I remember Brad was so tired. He was so exhausted. And I was laying there, and it was probably 1 o'clock in the morning, and I get a phone call from the hospital. And that's odd. If you're getting a call to the Ronald McDonald House in the middle of the night about the care of your babies, it's not something good. So I get a call, and they're like, Oakland is struggling really bad. And that's all that I could hear them saying. I'm like, I'm on my way. I'm on my way. I tried to wake Brad up, but for the life of him, I think he was just in like the deepest sleep, and I didn't have time to try to wake him up. I'm like, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. And I went running out of our room. I went running down the hallway and the sidewalk, and it was like running as fast as I could to get down to that NICU. And I remember running into their little pod and having a team of doctors just surrounding her. I'm talking like probably 8 to 10 doctors and nurses by her bedside because they had to try to get the tube in as fast as they could because she was losing oxygen. She couldn't breathe on her own. And I just remember just falling to the floor. And actually, one of the near and dear nurses that was there the night that the babies were born, she came for the transport team to the hospital across town to pick the babies up. She was also there that night that happened with Oakland. And she just wrapped her arms around me. And I couldn't bear to see like them, all these hands of these adult doctors working on my tiny, tiny 2 pound baby. And it was just so scary. I couldn't see her. But then eventually, like after a few minutes of them working on her and me sitting outside that door, just like crying on the floor, they said, you can come in. She's settled in. Just try not to touch her. We're trying to like really just get her to settle down. You know, her heart rate was up really high and we just want her to be able to relax now. And I just went in there and I just sobbed at the side of her bed. I had the tears streaming and like I was just looking at her. She looked exhausted, you guys. Like I could just see it in her little face. Like she wouldn't even open her eyes. She was just so tired. She had worked so hard, but then she also had something really traumatic happen where, they're putting a tube down her throat. And it's not like where nowadays when you hear about people being on a ventilator, they're usually in a coma state because they would try to remove the tube and they try to fight it. She wasn't. She was awake. So our babies, they were not unconscious. They were not in any type of medical induced coma the entire time. So she was probably trying to fight that feeling and trying to fight what they were doing because it can't be comfortable at all. But then also at the same time, she can't breathe and gasping for air. And it was just one of the hardest things to ever see in my entire life. And I can see it when I close my eyes. I can remember the details. I remember what the room looked like and everything. But at the same time, gosh, now that I look at her as a beautiful 7-year-old little girl, and those lungs work good, you guys. She can scream and she can talk and she can praise Jesus. And I just look at that and I think, wow, like if you would have told me that that's who she would be at 7 years old, I couldn't imagine it, but I could only have had hope for a day like that. From the get-go, the babies, they were just smaller. They were definitely smaller, and they always had an adjusted birthday. So you may hear people reference this when they have twins. So I would say, they came home at 3 months old, but they were actually like newborns. They were 1 month old adjusted. So we always had to take that and adjust it backwards because they were born in August and they weren't supposed to be due until November. We had to adjust for their birthdays. We had to adjust for their milestones, especially like their feeding and everything. Like we wouldn't introduce like the oatmeals, and we wouldn't introduce baby food until their adjusted age. We couldn't expect them to start making milestones like walking and crawling until their adjusted age. So that was a little bit hard, but it was a relief because I could say I had a 6-month-old baby, and everyone's like, well, are they sitting up on their own? I'm like, no, because they're technically only 3 months old. So it definitely, it was a little harder because, sometimes you'd be like, oh, how old's that baby? And you'd be like, they're 6 months. And they're like, well, they're not doing this, this, and this, and they're so tiny. I'm like, well, it's because they're really only supposed to be 3 months old. They missed 3 months out of growing in my womb, and they're out here in the world. So they have just always been a lot tinier than other kids their age. I remember one of the hardest seasons when the kids first came home from the hospital was they came home right at the beginning of cold and flu season and RSV season. And I feel like this year with the pandemic is going to be a year that we're going to be approaching that so much more, and people are going to be hearing the term RSV so much more. So RSV is a respiratory virus that gets into the lungs of little kids. So we did have a home health nurse that would come to our house and be able to administer a vaccine to our children, a shot. And the shot was called Synagis. And I remember these little tiny vials, like the size of my pinky, so tiny. She'd come in, and each one of those vials was $3,000, you guys. And thank God we had insurance, but it was $3,000 a vial. And she'd weigh the babies and then she'd give them the shot. Well, I remember the last few times that they got that shot, she came out and their weight had gotten over the prescription amount for the one vial. So she had to open 2 vials. So that was $6,000 per baby. And that's $12,000 in one day in medical treatment. And I am so thankful that our babies were able to get that the shot to help their lungs and everything to prevent RSV. But the amount that it cost was crazy. And we had to fight with our insurance to even get it approved. So it was a struggle. It's like if our insurance didn't cover it, were Brad and I going to be able to take on the $12,000 bill that we get from the hospital? Or what do we do? And that was a tough thing because it's like you want the most and the best for your babies. And I wish there wasn't a price that you had to pay. But by the time that our kids were even released from the NICU, this doesn't have anything to do with their therapies or any doctors or surgeries that they had. After they were released, they had accumulated over $1 million in medical bills. That started becoming very overwhelming because those bills started coming in right after they came home from the hospital. And it was really discouraging. Brad gets laid off in the winter. So they came home in November and the medical bills started coming in. And then we knew these home health nurses were coming to help take care of them and administer this medication. And it was just adding up to be so much. It was the medical bills still get me to this day. Brad and I are very financially focused, and we get big medical bills and we know we're going to hit our deductible right at the beginning of the year. And it is just the saddest thing because it's like it costs so much to have healthy children, especially if they're medically fragile. And I wish there wasn't that cost associated with it because we would be so much further ahead in our lives if we weren't having to pay high deductibles and paying off all of these medical bills for all of these years that we have. I remember I stopped checking the mail at one point in time, and Brad would be like, when was the last time you got the mail? And I was like, probably like last week. And he's like, you can't be doing that. And we actually would get letters from the post office in our mailbox saying like, your box is too full. You need to come to the post office to pick up the rest of your mail because we couldn't fit it in there. And he got on me and he's like, why aren't you getting the mail? Why can't you walk out across the road? And it was because it was so overwhelming to me, you guys. The medical bills, like I just couldn't handle it. And then it was also so frustrating because the medical bills, not only did we go to a children's hospital, but then the physicians would bill through a different department, and the respiratory people bill through a different program, and these doctors are contracted through different places. And I was so confused, and there were so many places to pay. And they would send it, and then they'd send another one, and they send another one, and they'd say final notice, and then we get bills from a collection agency. So I just stopped checking the mail. I could not handle it. I was so overwhelmed. And that's another message that I want to go into a little bit more detail with you guys. And want to show you how I went from that being a really tough season of life with all the bills, and how we manage it and how we are still handling it today. So if you're interested in that message, please let me know. But I'm going to continue on with the rest of this. So right away, when they came home, it was cold and flu season, so I wasn't able to take them out anywhere. I wanted to show my babies to the world, and I could not take my kids anywhere. We did not go anywhere for their first Thanksgiving. We spent that at home. Some family did come over, and we got to celebrate with them. We did not get to go to our extended family Christmases the first year. That was hard. I remember that one of my bosses at the bank actually had a Santa that she knew come out to the house and take a picture, because we weren't going to be able to go get pictures with Santa our first Christmas. And you guys, our babies were so little that they had no idea, but it was like, this is mine and Brad's first Christmas being parents. And we wanted to do all these things, and we couldn't. We could not take our kids out. And also, like I mentioned, the medical bills were so expensive. Brad had gotten laid off. We went through our entire savings account when I was living out of the hospital, and Brad was working in the house, and the bills and everything still had to be paid back home. And that was such a struggle, because we didn't have money to buy their first year's Christmas presents. And it was heartbreaking, because I wanted to do something for our kids. Like, this is their first Christmas. And I mean, it was December at this point, so they were only like a month old, adjusted, but I wanted to give them the best life possible. I remember just not having any money at all. And the only thing that I was actually able to buy them their first Christmas were a couple custom books from online, and they came with their names in them. And I wanted to be able to get them something, but that was all we could afford. I couldn't take them out anywhere. The medical bills were rolling in. It was just a really tough season. I wanted to share these babies and this joy with the world, but we couldn't. We had to do what was in the best interest of them. And it was just tough. And then the therapy started, you guys. The therapy started, and it was extensive therapy. Both of our kids started with therapy, even in the NICU, but then when they released, we did outpatient therapy. At one point, we had nurses coming to our home to do therapy, and then we would go to outpatient therapy centers at different hospitals. Where we were living at the time, we were 25 minutes away from the nearest therapy center, and that was a drive. So 2 days a week, every week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, therapy was always Tuesdays and Thursdays. I would pack both kids up, and we would drive 25 minutes to therapy, do their therapy, drive back home, and then continue on with our day. There was so much therapy from the get-go. We did speech, physical, and occupational therapy, and at one point in time, Barrett was actually even doing like a food therapy. This continued on for years, you guys, for years. And it was tough, because a majority of the time it fell on me, because Brad does a lot. He works a lot, and he travels a lot for work. There were the seasons when he was laid off where he could come along with me, but a lot of that therapy fell on me. All the doctor's appointments fell on me. Anytime that I'd get the news at the doctor's office that the surgery was coming, then I was the one who had to relay that to Brad, and it was tough. Our son Barrett, we call him Bear, he ended up having probably 3 surgeries within the first 3 years of his life that were outpatient, that did not happen in the NICU when he was there. He had also had a couple surgeries in the NICU. So he had a handful of surgeries, within the first few years of life. And that was just hard, because I wanted nothing more for my kids to get better. So I knew it was just a lot of work. I knew therapy was work on them, but it was also work on me, because I needed to take them to all of these appointments. And at the time, I did have like a small career, a home-based business. And so it was nice. I was not able to continue to work with all the appointments that they'd have and all the time that I would need off. So it really was a blessing in that aspect that I was available to be able to take them, but it was also a drain and very, very exhausting doing all of the appointments. As the kids grew older, we learned of different opportunities for them. And our son Barrett, he has his own story that he'll one day be able to share. And I don't want to share anything that would ever make him feel ashamed of who he is. But he is the most amazing little kid. He is so strong. He is so determined. And unfortunately, he's my baby that had to struggle more. Oakland eventually started hitting her milestones pretty spot on. She started talking first, and she started getting around first. And Barrett just needed a little bit more time, and he struggled. And it was so hard. I never wanted to be the one to compare my twins, but it was so hard knowing that they were the same age, born in the same minute, and he was so much further behind her, especially when it came to like physical things, the walking, the crawling, even the talking. he struggled so much more, and it just took so much more effort for him. At one point in time when he was little, we actually were seeing a neurologist to try to get a reason to find out what was going on. And they did a few MRIs, which those were very tough procedures to watch. They actually put him to sleep in my arms a couple times, and I watched his body go from full of life and active to a lifeless right in my arms, and then lay him down on an MRI table, and to see your child completely unconscious is it's a tough thing to witness. So they did a few MRIs to check for different brain damage and brain abnormalities, and by the grace of God, all of those came back clear. He has no signs, nothing in his brain that shows that there was any brain damage due to the lack of oxygen after birth. Just kept getting the report. You just need to keep doing therapies, and he's going to get stronger and stronger, and he's going to keep growing. So what that meant was, even more therapy, even longer therapy sessions. And after his therapy, he'd be exhausted. So if we wanted to do anything the rest of the day, we couldn't, because he was so tired out from the therapy that he was doing. So he could be at the therapy center for up to 3 hours by the time he was done with all his appointments, and then we'd leave and he'd come home and he would just be exhausted and his muscles were fatigued, and I could see that. And then they were also wanting us to do therapy at home. So not only am I trying to run a business from home but take care of 2 babies, I'm also doing a lot of therapy with him at home. And then he'd give a lot of resistance because he was so tired, or his muscles would be so sore, and he didn't want to do that at home. He wanted to be able to play. And then I'm trying to keep Oakland entertained over here with some toys while I'm trying to do therapy with Barrett over here, and he's like resisting. It was just a really tough season. So this continued on. I mean, I'm talking like we're probably at age 3 now, and it was just a cycle of doing therapies, doctor's appointments, specialist appointments. They'd order more tests, and then we'd have to wait on the results, and it'd be like a roller coaster, and you're just going back and forth and back and forth. So the journey did not end the day that we came home and from the hospital. It did not end there at all. Barrett also struggled with his muscles in his legs quite a bit. So at one point in time, he was not walking, and they thought that maybe he should get braces on his legs. And that was just really hard, because I just wanted my boy to be like able to keep up with all the other kids, and I didn't want him to get picked. He was little at this time, probably around age 3. They did give him braces and a walker. He refused to use the walker in public because too many people would give him attention for it, and he hated the attention. Even if I tried to get him to walk into the therapy center with it, he wouldn't use it. And we lived in a split level house, so he didn't really get to use the walker too much there because there were a lot of steps, but occasionally he'd get into that walker and he would just go to town. He was so excited because he was upright, he was on his feet, and he was able to see the world from a different height instead of just crawling. So that was really great. But at the same time, it was just a tough thing to see your child. You have one kid that's running around and she's getting around everywhere, and I'm not comparing them at all, but then you have another kid that's struggling so much, and you just want the best for both of them at the same time. The therapy was so extensive. At one point, we did a therapy called spider cage therapy, and we did not have a center close to us that offered that, but it was something that it was highly recommended by his therapist that he do this. So from our house to the therapy center, it was an hour and like 5-minute drive to the therapy center that offered this. And it was so intense. They call it an intensive therapy. It was so intense that I had to take him 4 days a week to this therapy center. So not only was I driving an hour and 5 minutes each way, but I was also taking him 4 days a week. So I get up first thing in the morning. His appointments were pretty early in the morning. I believe we started around 8 a.m. So we'd leave our house. I'd have to pack up. Brad was working. It was in the season in the summer where he was working. So it was just me and the twins. And I'd have to drive our little girl to the grandparents' house, or I'd have to take her to a sitter because I couldn't take her to the therapy center with me for a 3-hour therapy appointment. And I remember just driving so early in the morning. I'd eat my breakfast in the car, and I would just be in the car. It felt like from sun up to sundown on those days. And I felt like I was living out of my car. And, the kids were with me during this whole time, but it was weighing on me. Like, it was just so strenuous, getting up, packing all of the bags day after day, getting on the road by 7 o'clock in the morning so we can make it to his appointment by 8, and then being there for 3 hours. And I was in the room, and it was such a struggle because he was struggling. He was resisting, he was fighting. And then, like I said, he was exhausted, and I get him back in the car and we load up, and then we do the hour truck back home. And then he was so tired that we couldn't do anything else on those days. And this was, from what I recall, it was like a month-long therapy that we ended up doing with him. So we would just go back and forth. He ended up getting really sick in the middle of it. He ended up getting like a virus in the middle of it, and it was like a cold, and he was just sick. And I think it was because his immune system was down. He was working so hard. So we actually had to take a week off of the therapy for him to be able to recover. And it just pushed it out even further, and it just made that season even harder because I wanted nothing more for him to heal and to make some really great progress. But at the same time, his body was just fighting so hard. I remember one day in particular, we were going up to the therapy center. I drove, the hour to get there and dropped my daughter off, and we were getting ready to go in. And I could just tell he was not in a good mood that day. He was fighting it from the get-go as soon as we got out of the car. And I take him into the therapy center, and his therapist take him back, and they're like, "We can't work with him today. He is just not having it. He doesn't want it, and we just don't want to make this traumatizing for him." And with the way the spider cage worked, is kind of cool. You'd have to Google a picture of it, and I have a couple pictures I can share of Barrett inside it, but it's just this big metal cage with all these little bungee cords and this vest that goes on your kids, and these bungee cords like strap all over the vest and all over his body and his arms and legs, and those put resistance. But for the first time in Barrett's life, he was able to do his therapy upright. He was able to stand up to do his therapy because the whole support system was able to keep him up, and so he was able to work on his steps. He was able to work on strengthening his legs that he wasn't able to use before. He was able to strengthen his legs, and he was able to use those, and he was able to do different types of therapy and different exercises because of the contraption that he was in. He was able to do that. So I remember one day they were like, "We can't even get him in the bungees. Like, he is not putting the vest on. He is fighting us, and we're not going to make this any more traumatizing." And I think this was like the third week of it, and I was getting pretty exhausted, you guys, and I was just so discouraged. I'm like, "We just drove an hour here, and I'm so tired already as it is." And we loaded up and we got in the car, and I was just like, "Is this even worth it? I'm so tired." And I was almost mad at him. Like, I shouldn't have been mad at him, but I'm just being real with you guys. I was discouraged and I was upset, and I'm like, "Why couldn't you just do your work today, buddy? Like, I mean, we drove all this way and wasted all this gas, and we're putting all these miles on our car, and I'm so tired." And I'm like, "I know you're tired, but if we can just get this done, then this can be over." And I just cried. I remember just crying, and I stopped through a drive-through to grab something for lunch. And while I was ordering, Barrett didn't talk much. He didn't talk much. He couldn't communicate with me that he was tired. He couldn't communicate. He couldn't talk. He couldn't explain his feelings. He didn't speak much before the age of 4. And he was sitting in the back seat, and I was sitting there, and I was quiet, and the tears are just streaming down my face. And for the very first time, he sang a song, you guys. He sang Five Little Monkeys Jumping on the Bed in his sweet little voice with his struggle to even say each word. And I just remember thinking, "Okay, God." So he didn't make any physical gains today. He didn't get to, do his physical steps today, and his legs didn't get stronger, but his voice is getting stronger. And for the first time, I was able to hear that he was singing a sweet, sweet song. And it was just a moment for me. I'm like, okay, maybe God's not moving in his physical life, but he's moving in other parts of his life. His speech is developing. And it was just one of those things. It was the hardest day, but it was the most beautiful day in the same time because he was making progress, and I was able to see progress. One of the hardest days of my entire life, I would say one of the hardest weekends of my entire life, was the weekend of their 3rd birthday party. And like I mentioned before, I make a really big deal out of their birthday parties. I love to decorate. I love for them to have their own special individual themes and cakes. And I just want them to know that God planned that day for a reason. Like, God gave them that birthday. He brought them into this world. And I think it's really something that we need to celebrate. So like I said, I make a really big deal out of birthdays. And it was their 3rd birthday. And I was just having a hard time because we had the party and it was raining. And so we were all cooped up in the garage. And at one point, Oakland decided that she was going to go out and play out in the yard in the rain with a few of her cousins. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cute." And I look over and I'm trying to find Barrett because at this point he was not walking. He would not use his walker at that party. He couldn't get down on the ground by himself. And we didn't want him crawling around in the garage and all of this stuff. And I was looking around for him, and he was with his papas. And I looked at him one time and he was with my dad, and I looked at him another time and he was with Brad's dad, and he was just sitting on their lap and they were holding him. And I wanted nothing more for that little boy than to be out in that yard playing in that rain with his cousins, and he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it, and it wasn't even that like we couldn't take him out and walk around in the rain with him. It's just that he couldn't keep up with them. He wanted to do exactly what they were doing and he couldn't. And my heart broke. I mean, it broke. I was just sobbing because I'm like, my baby boy, like, I want him to be able to do everything, and I want life to be easy for him, and I don't want it to be this hard for him. Why does it have to be this hard for him? And it was just excruciating. It was heartbreaking. And I mean, his papas were taking such good care of him, but I wanted nothing more for him to be able to have that joy and that experience with the other kids, and he just couldn't keep up. So that night it was just really weighing on me. I went to bed just so heartbroken. So heartbroken for him and just wanting so much more for him. And the next day was Sunday, and we went to church, and it was a day that I will never forget. It was a day that I had an experience that I had never really experienced before, especially in church and in my spiritual life. But my sister came in and she was sitting down on the one side of me. The kids were back in the childcare room and Brad was on the other side of me. So it was just my sister, my brother-in-law, and Brad. And we were sitting there and there was a lot of friends that we were getting to know at the church. And so we all kind of sat together, and I was just having a day where I was like, I don't really want to be here. I don't want anyone to see me. And then the song started playing. And I heard God say, you just have to give that little boy to me. Give him back to me. You can't carry this weight. And I could not carry the weight anymore. No matter how much therapy we had done, no matter how much work and how many appointments and how many hours and hours of work that he was doing and I was doing with him. And no matter what, like, I could not fix it. And it made me so upset because it was so hard, because as a parent, you want nothing more than to fix the struggles for your kids. And I could not make his legs any stronger. I could not help him walk. I could not help him, grow and do all these different things. I could not do it. I was doing everything I possibly could. I was completely exhausted. I was taking it so hard because I just wanted the best thing for him. And I couldn't do it anymore. And I said to God right there in that church service, like, I can't do this anymore. He is yours. Like, he is yours and only you can handle this. And I surrendered my baby to him. I gave my baby up to God. And, I wasn't physically like never going to be his mom again. That's not what it was. Like, I was just giving his strength and his health and everything to God. And that was the hardest thing in the world. And I was sobbing. I mean, think about giving your child up and giving up that control over them. I was just sobbing. And I remember my sister and Brad were just like holding on to me. And they didn't really know what was happening in the time, because we were in worship and I didn't want to talk about it, and like I couldn't talk about it, but they just held me up and put their arms around me, and they didn't know what was happening. But in that moment, I remember that Sunday morning, I can tell you exactly where I was sitting in that church. I was just I was surrendering, and I surrendered my child and I gave him to God, and the mountains began to move. God changed things. God made progress start happening. And I wouldn't say it was immediately, but I know that the next Saturday, right after I surrendered him, the previous weekend, there was an elders prayer at our church. And it was the first time that we told the church kind of what was going on with Barrett, and we took him with us. Most of the people who came that needed something prayed for were a lot older than us. And we were the youngest couple to bring in our little boy to be prayed over. And I will never forget two of my favorite near and dear pastors. They prayed for him on that day, and we told him it was his legs, and they laid hands on him and they began to pray. And the next thing you know, within 2 months, that experience with him, his birthday was at the last weekend of August. The experience with the elders in our church was at the beginning of September, and by November of that year, Barrett was walking, and he was up on his feet, and he was making so much progress. And I think it was because I was able to surrender him and give him to God, and just give God that ability to just heal him and to take control of the situation. And honestly, 100%, it lifted the weight right off of my shoulders. I wanted to be there and I wanted to do it all, but I couldn't handle it. I couldn't heal him, and I had to give him to the one who created him and the one who loves him so much more than I even love him, as his mom who gave birth to him. But God was able to work in him and heal him, and he was able to gain so much more strength. But after several years, our kids are now in first grade. After several years, they have just grown so much. And I'm so thankful for all the doctors and the therapists that have been able to take the time with our kids, and especially with Barrett. Barrett is the most determined little boy I've ever met in my entire life. He is so strong. He is so strong-willed. He is just resilient, and he has so much knowledge inside him. And if you just get to know him, he's the silliest little sweetest kid in the world. We call him like our sugar bear, because he wants to hug, and he's so affectionate, and he wants to be able to just be goofy, but just be a little boy. And I just pray that the world never judges him and just brings him down from how far he's come. And that is just something I pray for daily. He is just making leaps and bounds. Now, recently, like I said, Barrett Barrett is 7 years old and he's in the first grade. And recently, within the last year, we went to an eye doctor and they said that, his eyes were struggling. His eyes were weak. So they went ahead and prescribed him glasses. And it's not because of the vision in the eyes, it's because of the muscles in his eyes. They prescribed him glasses, and it was in the hopes that the glasses would be able to strengthen his eyes. Recently, we got a referral to a different eye doctor, and it's actually like a children's eye doctor back in Akron that we spent all those months and months at, and all of our surgeries have taken place in Akron. So just a couple weeks ago, we had a 3-hour appointment in Akron, and it was just Barrett and I. It was his first day of school. I had to take him out of school early and drive him up there. And we get there, and it's a 3-hour long appointment at this referral. And when you look at Barrett's eyes, you can't tell that they're weak. You can't tell that he's having so much trouble getting his eyes to focus. His muscles are trying so hard. And what I learned at that appointment is that when they shine a light and they look through his eyes and they're able to see the muscles in the back, it's almost like as if you were working out in the gym and you're lifting really heavy weights. You know how eventually your muscles start to quiver and they start to shake because they're trying so hard. Well, that's what's happening in Barrett's eyes, and his eyes are working so hard to focus, and they're working so hard to stay aligned, and they're working so hard that his muscles are eventually just gonna they could just eventually just give up because they have to work so hard. We found out that his right eye is working so hard, and the doctor's really concerned because if it keeps sending those signals to keep working hard and hard and the eye doesn't improve and it just continues to take so much work, eventually his brain can cut off communication with his eye, and then he would end up going blind in that eye, which would leave him with only one good eye. But if an accident or injury ever happened to his left eye, then he would be completely blind. So what they have been recommending is that we do a little bit of patching therapy, which means we put a patch over his good eye so that his weaker eye will be able to use its strength, and it'll be able to be the only thing he's depending on for a few hours a day, and hopefully with the hopes that his eye will get stronger. So he is doing patching therapy, but she said it's such a large amount of work that would have to be done that she's never seen patching be able to make that better. And so he is currently scheduled to have surgery on his eyes here in the next couple months. And I was taking that really hard at the beginning because I'm like, we're going to do your patching therapy, buddy, and we're going to like pray over this, and it's going to get better, and we're going to work at this, and you're going to keep your glasses on, and we're just going to pray that those glasses work just so you don't have to have another surgery, because he's getting older and he's more familiar with what's going on. And it's not like we can just hand him over the nurses and he thinks he's going to go have playtime like he used to. Like, he's going to have to walk back to that operating room, and he's going to know that they're going to have to put him to sleep, and he's going to wake up and he's going to have boo-boos and all kinds of stuff. Like, it's just harder the older that they're getting. And I thought we were past all of the surgeries for a really long time. I thought like, wow, we're doing really great. We haven't had to have surgery in like 4 years. I thought we were doing really great. And then they hit me with this news last week that he is going to have surgery, and it's going to be a little bit of a recovery, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And we have so many appointments that are going to be before the surgery, but then also like post-op surgery appointments. We're going to have quite a few of those. So it means a lot of driving back and forth to Akron. It means a lot of just appointments. He's going to be uncomfortable, you guys. And I want nothing more for my baby to be like healthy and in like complete good health and feelings. And he's going to be in pain, and it's going to be hard. And I got really down just thinking like, what else can we do to make this better? And then I had to remind myself, there's nothing that I can do to make this better. We can just pray for him. We can pray for him. And I just need to give this to God and let God's plan, unfold. And if he has to have this surgery, we're just going to nourish him back to health the best that we can. But it's just so hard to see your kid hurt. You don't want to see your kid hurt. And this poor boy, you guys, he's been through more in his 7 years of life than what most people have been in a lifetime. And I just know he is so strong, and God has the biggest plans for him. And I'm just holding on to the hope that, you know what, I'm giving this also to God. This is just another obstacle. This is just another challenge. But you know what? He has overcome so much in his life. And what I want to share with you guys is that I just hold on to that hope. I hold on to that promise. I'm holding on that God loves this little boy more than what I love him. And that's just hard to even imagine, that somebody loves your kids more than you do. But God loves him more, and God has big plans for his life. And that's what's giving me hope. So we are going forward, and we're going to be walking through another little bit of a challenge here in our life, in our personal life, in our home life. We're going to be working on his strength and his healing. So I do ask that you just pray for him, because this is going to be hard. I pray for him to just know that he is loved and we're only doing this out of love. I never want him to think that we are putting him through something because we want it to hurt him. That's not what we want at all. A parent never wants that. But I just pray that I just ask for you guys to also pray for him and just pray that he heals quick, and then that God, will continue to strengthen his body, and that also, people will just see that he is a very unique individual, and he's a loving, and he's caring, and he's goofy, and he is so incredibly intelligent, and he's so smart. I want the world to be able to see him like that as well. I don't want to speak for my kids, but I also just know that there's so much power in prayer. And I wanted to be able to share with you guys the progress that he has been able to make over these last 7 years to go from a baby that's weight dropped to 1 pound, 7 ounces to where he is today. It's just unbelievable and it's remarkable. So if you are struggling and you feel like the weight of parenting is just 100% on your shoulders, please just know that there is God who loves your baby so much more than you do. And you can surrender your babies, because that was the best thing that I did. And last week when I was really struggling after the news of another surgery, I was taking that weight upon myself again and trying to fix everything. But at the same time, I just had to remind myself that he's God's, and God just gave him to me to help and to grow and to take care of and to care for. And eventually he's going to go back to God and he's going to be 100% God's. But I'm just doing the best that I can with what I can. And I'm just trying to take care of this gift that God gave me the best that I can. And so if you found yourself in that similar situation, I'll be praying for you where you can just give your babies back to God, and you can just give their health and give their education and give their safety back to God, and just pray that God protects them and take that weight off of your shoulders, because that's not something you are meant to carry. Only God can control certain situations and certain circumstances. I know surrendering him back after his third birthday to God has changed so much, and it's just helped me so much. So I'm just going to be praying for you, other parents, on that journey as well. So the story is not over yet, obviously. We may have other things that come up in the future, but I just wanted to give you guys a quick update of where we were. And I just want to say thank you so very much for tuning into this episode. If you guys would like to keep updated on this situation, just let me know, send me a message, and I can keep you updated on his progress, and also let you guys know when the surgery date is, so you can be praying for him. There are so many more messages coming. You're going to be hearing from me for the next couple episodes, because I am going to be sharing some of the hardest things that I've went through in my entire life over the next couple episodes. So I am just praying that God just guides the words and just gives me the boldness and the strength to be able to share the darkest season that I ever went through. But in the meantime, I am recording so many episodes with so many amazing guests, and those will be coming right back onto the podcast very, very, very soon to share with you guys. So if you are enjoying the podcast, please consider leaving a review or sharing it with a friend. This podcast is picking up so much momentum, and I just give all that glory to God, because I am such a broken, messy person, but he was able to take that and make it into something. And I hope you guys are feeling encouragement from this podcast. I hope that you are able to grow from it and able to realize that your life is worth living and you were made on purpose for a purpose. So until next time, you guys, I cannot wait to continue sharing more with you, and we will talk again soon.